Forced by her parents, she wed a blind millionaire in her sister's place. But that night, he learned. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain fell steady over the small town, drumming on the sidewalks and dripping from the awnings like a steady heartbeat. In a modest two-story house on the edge of town, Ella stood in her bedroom, her hands trembling as she tried to smooth the wrinkles out of her dress. Her parents' voices echoed from downstairs, sharp and insistent. Tonight was the night. She was not going in her sister's place just to sing a song or cover a chore. She was being pushed into something far heavier. She was being forced to stand in her sister's shoes and marry a man she had never met. Her reflection in the mirror told her everything. The dress fit, but it was borrowed. The pearls around her neck were fake, their luster cheap under the yellow lamp. She pressed her palms against her abdomen, trying to calm the churn in her stomach. In her mind, the words repeated like a drum. This is not your life. This is not your wedding. You are a stand-in. From the bottom of the stairs, her father called, Ella, hurry. The Brooks family cannot wait. You know how much depends on this. His voice was not cruel, but it was weighed down with years of debt, of pride lost and bargaining made. Ella knew the truth. This arrangement was not about love. It was about survival. When she stepped outside, the storm was in full force. The driver waited by the car, umbrella open, a silent figure in the rain. As she slid into the back seat, Ella caught her breath. The leather smelled of polish, expensive and foreign. This was a world that was not hers. Yet tonight, she was being offered to it like currency. The ride stretched long. Her mind chased itself in circles. Who was he, this man she was to marry? They said he was a millionaire, a man who had lost his sight years ago. Some whispered it was fate punishing his arrogance. Others said he was ruthless in business, building empires even in darkness. But in all the rumors, no one spoke of his heart. The car pulled up to the gates of a vast estate. The iron bars towered above her, slick with rain, and beyond them a mansion loomed with columns lit by warm golden light. It was a house that looked more like a fortress, and Ella felt her throat tighten. The driver opened the door. She stepped out into the downpour, her shoes sinking into gravel, her breath catching as the gates closed behind her. Inside, the air was hushed, the marble floor shining under chandeliers. The scent of lilies filled the hall, sweet and overwhelming. A notary waited by a long table, a thick document placed in the center. Ella's heart pounded as she approached. At the head of the room stood the man she was to marry. He was tall, his frame straight despite the walking cane he held. His dark hair was combed neatly, his face strong, marked with a kind of quiet command. His eyes, pale and unfocused, shifted slightly at the sound of her footsteps. You are not who they promised me, he said softly. His voice was even calm, but it carried weight. Ella froze. The words stung. She wanted to turn, to run, but her father's cough cut through the silence. Papers were shuffled, pens uncapped. The notary cleared his throat. The man's expression did not change, but his grip tightened on the cane. It does not matter, he continued. This is not about names, it is about duty. Her hands shook as she picked up the pen. Each letter of her signature felt like a stone dropping into a well. With the final stroke, the deal was sealed. The room erupted in polite claps, the sound hollow, as though celebrating a performance no one believed in. They called it a marriage. To Ella, it felt more like a sentence. When the guests dispersed and the mansion grew quiet, she found herself standing in the hallway outside the chamber that was now called theirs. She hesitated at the door, her heart racing. Inside, the man who was now her husband waited. The contract had been signed, but nothing about this was ordinary. What neither of them knew was that tonight a secret would begin to surface. A truth buried beneath duty and deception was about to break free, and when it did, it would change both of their lives forever. The mansion was quiet after the ceremony, too quiet, like the walls themselves carried the weight of secrets. Ella sat on the edge of a massive canopy bed, the silk sheets cool beneath her trembling hands. Her wedding dress, damp from the storm, clung to her skin. The pearls around her neck felt heavier than chains. In the hallway outside, footsteps faded as the last of the staff retreated. She was alone, except for the man who was now her husband, resting in a separate chamber just beyond the carved wooden door. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. The contract had been signed. Her signature was permanent, ink pressed deep into paper. She whispered to herself, "This is not my life. This is not my marriage." But no matter how many times she repeated it, the reality remained. She was bound by law, bound by family, bound by duty. Ella thought of her mother's pale hands, clutched tight around unpaid bills. She thought of her father's tired face, lined with years of disappointment. She thought of her sister, who had been meant for this role, and who had run away at the last moment. It was Ella who had been forced to step forward, a substitute bride sent to save her family's pride. Her throat tightened with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "I am nothing but a replacement," she whispered, her voice trembling in the vast room. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced them back. Crying would change nothing. Hours later, when the clock in the hall struck midnight, a gentle knock sounded at her door. She froze, her body tense. "Come in," she said softly. The door creaked open, and Adrian stepped inside. He moved with a slow certainty, cane tapping lightly against the floor. His face was unreadable, but his pale eyes seemed to fix on her even without sight. "You are restless," he said, his voice calm yet edged with curiosity. Ella's breath caught. "It is difficult to sleep," she admitted. Adrian tilted his head slightly, as though measuring her words. "A marriage built on duty rarely allows peace." His bluntness pierced her. She stared at him, searching for a trace of warmth, but his expression remained guarded. He was a man used to shadows, used to walls, and now she was one of those walls. "I know what your family thinks of me," he continued, his tone steady. "A blind millionaire who can be bargained with. A man with wealth, but without sight. They think I will never know the difference." Ella flinched. The truth was sharper than a blade. Adrian tapped his cane once against the floor. "But I am not blind to character. I can hear every shift in your voice, every hesitation. You are not the woman they promised me. Yet you stayed. Why?" His question hung in the air. Ella pressed her hands together to stop them from shaking. "Because I had no choice," she whispered. "Because my family needed me." For the first time, his expression shifted, a flicker of something like recognition. "So it is sacrifice, not greed, that keeps you here." She lowered her gaze, unable to answer. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken truths. Then, with a quiet sigh, Adrian stepped back toward the door. "Rest," he said simply. "Tomorrow, the house will feel less heavy." When the door closed, Ella fell back onto the bed. Her body shook with the weight of what had just passed. He had seen through her mask. He had named her sacrifice. And that truth left her torn between shame and a strange, unexpected relief. She stared at the ceiling until dawn, her mind racing. She was a wife in name, a pawn in a family's desperate game, but also something else. She was a woman with a choice still hidden in her heart. Would she endure this as a prison, or would she carve out something more? In the silence of the mansion, the question lingered like a storm cloud waiting to break. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting long golden lines across the polished marble floor. Ella stood in the grand dining hall, her hands folded nervously in front of her. The table stretched endlessly, laden with silverware that gleamed like mirrors. At the far end, Adrian sat upright, his posture composed, his cane resting against the chair. Though his eyes could not see her, his head turned as if he felt her presence. "Good morning," he said evenly, his voice carrying across the room like a calm command. "Good morning," Ella replied, her voice soft but steady. She lowered herself into the chair several seats away, unsure if she should sit closer. The silence that followed was heavy. The sound of the servants placing plates down echoed like distant bells. As breakfast began, a notary entered with a leather folder. He placed it carefully on the table between them. "The terms," he said respectfully, then withdrew without another word. Ella's heart sank as she opened the folder and scanned the document. Each line carved boundaries into her new life. Rule 1. There will be no intimacy beyond appearances in public. Rule 2. She must attend 5 public events as his wife. Rule 3. She is forbidden from interfering in his personal affairs or his business. Rule 4. She must keep the truth of their arrangement hidden from everyone, even her closest friends. Ella's throat tightened. She looked up, her voice catching. "These are strict." Adrian's pale eyes lifted toward the sound of her words. His tone remained calm, yet final. "Strict boundaries prevent messy entanglements. This marriage is not about love, Miss Ella. It is about preservation, reputation, and order. If you follow the rules, you will find life here tolerable." Her chest ached at the way he said, "Miss Ella," instead of wife. The word felt deliberate, a reminder that she was a contract, not a partner. She signed her name at the bottom of the page, her hand trembling. Each letter felt like another chain locking into place. With a faint smile that did not reach his eyes, Adrian nodded. "Now we understand one another." Oh. The day unfolded with tutors and assistants, sent to teach Ella the ways of high society. She walked through the vast halls of the mansion, her every step corrected, her posture adjusted, her speech refined. The etiquette lessons felt suffocating. Forks and spoons had names she had never cared to learn. Dresses were fitted, jewels selected. Each mistake she made was gently but firmly corrected, as though she were being reshaped into a woman who belonged to a world she had never asked to enter. At dusk, Ella slipped away from the lessons and wandered into a smaller room near the library. There, beneath a white cloth, she found an old piano. The keys were slightly out of tune, but when her fingers brushed across them, music filled the air, tender and imperfect. She closed her eyes and played softly, the melody carrying her back to simpler days when she dreamed of painting, of freedom, of a life untouched by bargains and contracts. Behind her, a voice spoke, low and curious. "You play." She startled, turning to see Adrian standing in the doorway, his cane tapping lightly against the frame. His face revealed nothing, but his head tilted slightly, as though he was listening closer than sight ever could allow. "It is not much," she said quickly. I taught myself a little." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the faint echo of the notes. Then he said, "Do not apologize. Sometimes imperfection is the most honest thing in the room." Her heart skipped, startled by the softness in his tone. Yet the moment passed quickly, and he turned away. "Tomorrow you will attend your first public event as my wife. Remember the rules. Appearances matter." When he left, Ella sat frozen at the piano bench. His words lingered in her chest, both a warning and a strange form of encouragement. She touched the keys again, whispering to herself, "I am more than a contract." But in the vastness of the mansion, the paper she had signed still bound her, every clause a reminder of the cage she now lived in. The first event arrived sooner than Ella expected. By the end of the week, she was escorted to a glittering gala in the heart of the city, a charity dinner filled with polished men in tailored suits and women in gowns that shimmered under the chandeliers. The air smelled of champagne and perfume, thick with laughter and shallow compliments. Adrian stood at her side, his cane steady in his hand, his posture commanding despite the blindness that shadowed his eyes. "Remember the rules," he whispered as they entered. His voice was low, yet unyielding. "We are partners in appearance, nothing more." Ella nodded, her fingers curling tightly around the clutch in her hand. The diamonds at her ears were borrowed from the family vault. The dress had been tailored to perfection by strangers. Yet no amount of silk or jewels could erase the pounding of her heart. She felt like an imposter, walking a tightrope above a crowd, eager for her to fall. Inside, the murmur of voices quieted as people turned to look. Whispers traveled faster than the servers carrying trays of wine. "That is Adrian Brooks's bride. They say she is not the woman he was supposed to marry. They say she is poor, a charity case dressed up as a wife." Aish comment stung like a hidden blade. Ella forced her chin higher, repeating in her mind the lessons drilled into her. Shoulders straight, eyes calm, smile reserved. Beside her, Adrian gave nothing away. He shook hands with businessmen, exchanged measured words with investors, every gesture precise. Then came the first test. A man with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue stepped forward. "So this is the famous Mrs. Brooks," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Tell me, where did you study? Which of the finishing schools did Adrian pull you from?" His smirk revealed the trap. Ella's stomach turned. She had no polished answer, no name of a school that would satisfy. For a heartbeat, silence threatened to expose her. Then she straightened, her voice clear though her hands trembled inside her clutch. "I studied at the School of Necessity," she said softly. "The kind that teaches you how to stand when the world pushes you down. The kind that teaches you loyalty, sacrifice, and the strength to protect the people you love." The man blinked, his smirk faltering. A few nearby guests exchanged surprised glances. Ella's cheeks burned, but she held her ground. From beside her, Adrian's head tilted slightly, as though he had just heard something that mattered. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips, barely visible to anyone but her. He lifted his glass and said calmly, "My wife speaks the truth, and I could not have said it better myself." The tension broke. The guests laughed politely, the music swelled again, and the man who had challenged her stepped back, his expression unsettled. For the rest of the evening, Ella found her footing. She stumbled once when a server nearly dropped a tray, but she recovered with a nervous laugh that charmed the onlookers. She answered questions simply, never pretending to be what she was not. And slowly, the sharp whispers dulled into curious murmurs. When the night ended and they returned to the mansion, Ella slipped off her heels and sank into a chair by the fire, her body aching from the effort. Adrian stood nearby, his cane resting against the arm of the sofa. "You surprised them," he said finally. His voice was calm, but there was a thread of something new in it, something softer. "You surprised me." "Oh." Ella looked up, startled. "Was that acceptable?" A quiet laugh escaped him. "More than acceptable. You reminded them that appearances are not the only thing that matter. Perhaps you even reminded me." Her chest warmed at the words, though she said nothing. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence with a fragile kind of peace. For the first time since signing the contract, Ella felt she had claimed a piece of herself back. She was still bound, still a substitute. But tonight she had stood tall. Tonight she had shown that she was not just a pawn in someone else's bargain. What she did not know was that the more she revealed her strength, the more Adrian's guarded heart began to shift, quietly, in ways neither of them could yet name. The following days unfolded with a rhythm Ella had never known before. The mansion was vast and filled with silence, yet her steps began to feel less foreign in its marble halls. Adrian remained distant in words, but she noticed how he listened, how his pale eyes shifted slightly toward her whenever she spoke. One evening, after another long dinner where they ate at opposite ends of the endless table, Ella gathered the courage to step onto the balcony outside the dining hall. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth from the gardens below. She wrapped her arms around herself, gazing at the stars that seemed far out of reach. Behind her, the faint sound of a cane tapping on the stone floor broke the quiet. Adrian stepped into the night. His face was calm, but his shoulders carried a weight that the silence could not hide. "You should not stand in the cold," he said softly. "I wanted to breathe," Ella replied. "Inside feels heavy." Adrian moved closer, resting his hand on the stone railing. His eyes, pale and unseeing, seemed to drift toward the horizon. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then his voice came, low and almost fragile. "People think blindness is darkness, but it is not. It is emptiness. An endless, colorless void that follows you even in your dreams. Some nights, I wonder if I will ever remember the world the way it used to be." I am not afraid of losing sight. I am afraid of being left alone in it. The rawness of his confession pierced her. She had seen him as distant, untouchable, a man hidden behind rules and contracts. But now she saw a wound, invisible yet deep. Without thinking, she said quietly, "You are not alone. The words hung between them, fragile and unplanned. Adrian tilted his head, as though he could measure the truth in her voice. His lips parted as if to answer, but then he simply nodded once, his expression unreadable. Ella turned back to the stars, her chest tight with emotions she could not name. The contract still bound them. The rules still drew lines between their lives. Yet in that moment she felt a shift. Beneath the weight of duty and deception, something human and tender had begun to take root. As the night stretched on, the mansion no longer felt like only a prison. It felt, for the first time, like a place where both of them carried secrets they were afraid to share. And those secrets, fragile as they were, had begun to draw them closer together. The following week brought another grand event, a business gathering held in the ballroom of Adrian's mansion. The hall glowed under chandeliers, every detail polished, every guest dressed in elegance. Ella walked beside Adrian, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She had practiced every step, every greeting, every smile. Yet beneath her calm exterior, her heart pounded. As the evening unfolded, she moved through the crowd with him, greeting investors, answering small talk. The whispers had not disappeared. She still heard them at the edges of the room, people questioning her background, doubting her worth. But she remembered the balcony night, the confession Adrian had shared. That memory gave her strength. At the center of the hall, a challenge came. A reporter with a sharp voice asked loudly, "Mrs. Brooks, what do you bring to this marriage besides your face? What could you possibly offer a man of such power and wealth?" The words sliced through the music and laughter, drawing eyes in her direction. For a moment, Ella froze. The room waited for her to stumble. Then she steadied her breath and answered, her voice clear. "What I offer is not measured in money or power. What I bring is loyalty. What I bring is the will to stand by a man when the world would rather see him alone. Wealth can vanish, power can crumble, but character endures." A hush spread through the ballroom. Then, slowly, applause began, scattered at first, then stronger. Adrian turned his head toward her, and though his eyes could not see, a faint smile appeared on his lips. Later that night, when the guests had gone and silence returned to the mansion, Ella found herself once again on the balcony. Adrian joined her, his cane tapping softly. This time, he did not speak first. Instead, he simply stood beside her, listening to the night. Finally, his voice came, low and thoughtful. "You carried yourself with more courage than most born into this world of wealth. You remind me that perhaps I was wrong to believe appearances are all that matter." Her heart tightened. For the first time, she felt that he was not speaking as a man bound by a contract, but as someone letting down the walls he had built. Beneath the stars, the distance between them seemed smaller. For Ella, hope flickered quietly. For Adrian, the guarded silence within him began to shift. Neither said the word love, but it was there, silent and waiting, like a seed pressed into the soil of their unlikely union. The warmth of their quiet connection did not last. A storm gathered inside the mansion, one that Ella had not seen coming. It began on a gray afternoon when unexpected visitors arrived. At the grand entrance stood her older sister, the woman who was meant to marry Adrian. Her face carried both guilt and defiance. Beside her was a man Ella had only seen in whispers across the ballroom, a ruthless shareholder known for challenging Adrian at every turn. The staff whispered nervously as they entered the drawing room. Adrian waited there, standing tall with his cane, his expression unreadable. Ella's pulse raced. She could feel the air grow heavy. The sister's voice trembled at first, then sharpened. "Adrian, you deserve the truth. The woman standing beside you is not your intended bride. She is my sister. She was forced to take my place when I could not go through with it." Ella's breath caught in her throat. The words ripped open the secret she had buried under layers of silence. The shareholder stepped forward, his tone cruel. "This so-called marriage is a fraud, a deception meant to bind you to a woman unworthy of your name. If this becomes public, Adrian, your reputation will collapse. Your fortune, your influence, your control over this company gone." The room spun around Ella. She looked at Adrian, her eyes pleading, but his face remained cold. His hand tightened on the cane until his knuckles turned white. "So it is true," Adrian said at last, his voice calm but edged with steel. "You are not the woman I was promised. You are the sister who stayed behind. And you let me believe—" His words trailed off, heavy with betrayal. Tears burned at Ella's eyes. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "I did it for our family, for survival. I never meant to deceive you. But everything I said to you, everything I did, it was real." Adrian turned sharply away, his jaw clenched. "Real?" His laugh was bitter. "All I see is a lie dressed in silk." The silence that followed was suffocating. The shareholders' smirk widened, feeding on the fracture between them. Ella wanted to reach out, to take Adrian's hand, but her body would not move. Shame anchored her in place. Finally, Adrian spoke again, his voice colder than she had ever heard. "Leave. Tonight." The word struck her harder than any blade. She gathered her skirt, her tears falling freely now, and rushed from the room. The mansion's halls that once felt like a prison now felt like a grave. Every step echoed with the weight of loss. When she reached her chamber, she collapsed onto the bed. Her body shook with sobs. For the first time since the wedding, the hope she had begun to feel was gone. She was not just a substitute bride anymore. She was a fraud, exposed and abandoned. And as the storm raged outside the windows, Ella realized the truth. Her heart had begun to belong to Adrian, and now it was breaking. Rain lashed against the tall windows of the mansion the night Ella fled the drawing room. She sat alone in her chamber, staring at the packed bag by her bed. She had no plan, no destination, only the aching truth that she had lost him. Her heart screamed to stay, but his words echoed endlessly. "Leave. Tonight." Yet as she prepared to vanish, fragments of hushed voices drifted through the corridor. She stilled, her hand frozen on the handle of the bag. A door had been left ajar near Adrian's study. She moved closer, and what she heard chilled her to the bone. The shareholder's voice, low and venomous. "Once the scandal spreads, the board will demand Adrian's resignation. With his reputation ruined and his blindness exploited, control of the company falls to me. Your part was simple: reveal the sister switch and let the pieces collapse." Ella's sister replied, her tone anxious. "You promised this would protect me. You swore no harm would come." "Harm?" The man laughed cruelly. "You are nothing more than leverage. When Adrian falls, so will she. And then I will hold everything." Ella's breath caught. It was never just about exposing her secret. It was a calculated betrayal designed to strip Adrian of his empire. Her shame and pain twisted into something sharper resolve. She rushed to Adrian's study, where he sat rigid in silence, his cane across his knees. He did not turn toward her. "I told you to leave," he said coldly. "You have to listen," Ella pleaded, her voice breaking. "It was never only about me. They planned this. The shareholder, my sister, they set us up. They want to destroy you, to steal everything you built." Adrian's expression remained hard, but his head tilted slightly, as though he was weighing her words. "And why should I believe the woman who has already deceived me? Because I would rather be hated for the truth than watch you fall for their lies," she answered. Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned with determination. For the first time, Adrian's hand slackened on his cane. He stood slowly, his presence commanding even in the storm of betrayal. "If what you say is true," he said, "then the fight is not over. We will face them, together." The word "together" cracked something inside Ella. Relief mingled with fear. This was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a chance. A chance to prove her worth, not as a contract bride or a replacement, but as a woman who would stand by his side. Outside, thunder roared as though the night itself was bearing witness. Ella drew closer, her heart pounding. "Then let me help you." Adrian turned his face toward her, and though his eyes were blind, she felt the weight of his trust returning, fragile but real. "Then help me fight," he said simply. In that moment, the storm outside no longer felt like ruin. It felt like a battle cry. The storm outside gave way to a gray dawn, but inside the mansion, another storm was about to break. That morning, the board of directors gathered in the grand hall, summoned by whispers of scandal and betrayal. The shareholder who had schemed against Adrian stood tall, ready to deliver the final blow. Ella was seated near the back, her hands clenched, her chest tight with fear. The shareholder's voice rang out with confidence. Adrian Brooks has deceived us all. His so-called marriage is a fraud. The woman beside him is not the bride he was promised. This deception proves his judgment is unfit, his leadership compromised. He should step down immediately, before his blindness leads us all into ruin. Gasps rippled through the room. Eyes turned toward Adrian, waiting for him to crumble. But he rose to his full height, cane steady in his hand, his voice clear and unwavering. "My blindness has never been my weakness," Adrian declared. "It has been my strength. It has taught me to see beyond appearances, to measure truth not by what glitters, but by what endures. Yes, Ella is not the woman promised to me, but she is the woman who stood against your lies. She is the woman who has shown more loyalty and courage than any title or bloodline could ever grant." The hall fell silent. The shareholder's smirk faltered. Adrian continued, his voice like steel. "And as for you, your dealings have been exposed. Financial records, hidden contracts, transfers meant to strip this company bare. The board deserves the truth, and here it is. You sought to destroy me with a deception, but your own corruption will undo you." A stack of documents was presented, evidence gathered in secret by Adrian's allies. The board members murmured in shock. Within moments, the tide shifted. Security was called, and the scheming shareholder was escorted out, his protests echoing hollow in the marble chamber. Ella's eyes filled with tears as she watched Adrian stand victorious, not because of his wealth, but because of his integrity. When the hall emptied, she approached him, her voice trembling. "Why did you defend me after everything?" Adrian turned toward her, his pale eyes softening. "Because even in your deception, your heart was true. You did not come to me for greed. You came to me for sacrifice. And in the end, you stayed to fight when you could have walked away." "All?" Her tears fell freely now. "I never wanted to be a lie to you. I only wanted to survive. But somewhere in all of this, I found more than survival. I found you." Adrian reached for her hand, his touch steady. "Then let us start again, not with contracts, not with rules, but with truth." In the days that followed, the mansion changed. The piano room was opened fully, sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Adrian had a new wing built to showcase Ella's paintings, her name etched proudly above the door. At the opening ceremony, he knelt before her, holding a simple ring. "Ella," he said, his voice unshaken, "will you marry me, not as duty, not as deception, but as the woman I have chosen with my heart?" Her answer was a whisper, choked with joy. "Yes." The applause of their friends and allies filled the hall. But for Ella and Adrian, the world had gone quiet, holding only the promise of a future rebuilt. From a marriage forged in lies and desperation, they had found something stronger, something real. Love, tested by fire, had become their truth. And in that truth, they finally found freedom.